So hello and welcome guys. Today I've put together a PowerPoint presentation just based on what we built through the lockdown project, which was a garden office. You can see it in the background of the first slide. We're quite happy with how it turned out, and again a lot of people have given us some good praise, so I thought I'd collate a few bits and pieces for people to understand before taking on a similar project and try and inspire people to do the same thing essentially. Obviously when we did this project, it was in a point where a lot of people were on lockdowns or going into lockdowns. This was this time last year, and there was a national epidemic, as it were, with COVID-19. So there was a high amount of people who were being told to stay at home or self-isolate or work from home or being furloughed. So there was a big demand for more additional space in the home. So I would advise a lot of people to look into different options available to them at this point in time. And if it is something that considers, obviously tickles your fancy, then building a garden office is more than a feasible option for you guys if we've managed to accomplish it ourselves as well. So doing a little bit of market research before even considering buying this was quite detrimental to making us decide on which pathway we took. What we tended to do is sit down and go through pros and cons of the situation. If it was a worthwhile investment, which as you can see in our area within Oxfordshire, the UK, the house prices are ridiculously high. So when we were looking to buy a bigger house, which was again about a year, 18 months ago, we were looking at potentially another £100,000 on top of what we've already got to buy another bedroom in our house, or give an extra room and a study. So that wasn't really a feasible option at the point of time. Maybe later on in life, but at this moment in time wasn't the best idea. Pros of, again, building something onto your house is that it will improve the stature of your house. It will create more options and more desirable effects if somebody was to purchase it from you in later life. So that again is a good investment. Other factors you have to be aware of is that it will give you kind of more substantial areas for you to kind of have, like a dining room or an outdoor gym or an extra space that will kind of give you more room to do hobbies in. It also gave us options to do things outside, which would be mostly the mowing, power washing, gardening, all the kind of external power features that we kind of added onto our project. It can be an expensive process, so again, looking at the options out there, you've got to consider what's right and what's wrong for you. You've also got elements of how stressful it can be. Nobody likes living in boxes or trying to find space for what had taken up the room before. Certain areas in the UK in particular may have you need to seek planning permission for. If you lived in like an area of natural beauty or there was a listed building status, then it can get a bit more complicated. And you've also got you can't take it obviously if you move, so that's one thing to be aware of. They are pretty bulky. You could take it all to pieces, but I probably wouldn't advise it once you've built it. So breaking down the research, if this is like a viable option for you, you could then go, right, okay, what would be the best value for money in this state? This was the mess of our garden before. As you can see, I started ripping up bits and pieces in the back garden to check what the ground was like underneath. You could do a single story extension out the back. So again, I looked into this. It was about £30,000 in plus mark. Just based on a basic kind of extension rule of thumb from researching, and that would again just increase the size of your kitchen or your front room. Wouldn't really give you a huge additional space. You've also got elements that would be cheaper, which would be roof conversions. Roof conversions again are very good options if you've got the space for them. The one problem that you have is that most pitch roofs won't facilitate, say, a dormer extension, so that is always something that will be problematic, and then you're getting into silly money if you have to height and the size of your roof. You would have to have planning permission and all the rest of it, and that can take years to kind of develop. You also have to consider that you'd have to bring in a staircase essentially to get up into the room, and that will take away space in your second story as well, which isn't a great idea. So that's one component to be aware of, and obviously the planning permission, all the rest of it can cause some stress. So the beauties of the garden office is that generally you won't need planning permission. I've looked into this quite a lot. It does come under the classification of a temporary building or structure, so it would in theory be the same way as erecting like a shed, as long as you follow certain exemptions which I've listed here for you. So again, if you live in an outstanding area of beauty or your building is already listed, there might be some restrictions on what's right and what's wrong. So you might have to obviously contact your local planning officer to see if there is a problem with that. Your roof of your building shouldn't exceed more than 2.5 meters, so you'll find that lots of the roofs are not pitched, they are flat, so that is something that makes them kind of come under that process. You have to, well, remain within a certain area of your boundary, so this varies from property to property, and you can research your own on websites and stuff that are available to you. And the floor areas, from what I've seen, is that essentially it can't exceed more than 15 square meters, and if it does, then obviously you're getting planning permission because it's very large. But this might vary from person to person, but that's from what I've read. So where to start? In the planning stage, essentially what we did was we'd look into a lot of companies that were providing this on websites in different areas around the country, so we had plenty of time at home throughout, see, in the evenings and weekends being told we can't go anywhere. And we found several websites which were quite keen to do the whole project for yourself. Our local one was Green Retreats, I think, which is just outside of the outskirts of Aylesbury. I believe they deal with a lot of caseloads from, say, London and the extreme borders of Berkshire and Buckinghamshire, where they are quite affluent areas, so we found them very pricey for what they were, although the quality seemed relatively similar to what we went for in the end. Again, there are other alternatives out there. You might have to go further afield. What we found is that most places were charging you for internal square footage as opposed to external as well, which was good for you, but also it's something to be considering if you weren't going too far with them. But you've also got to consider other aspects of what's going on. So when we did quiz quotes and stuff like that, which were offered to us with emails and things, they wouldn't go up to the point of electrical installation, because again it needs to be done by a registered electrician, so that's an added additional cost of what they would be quoting you, which again they wouldn't really tell you about unless you really did ask them. And some of the manufacturers would only go so far as doing basic level of kind of installation as well. So if your insulation of the building was quite small, the room's going to be pretty freezing, so again that's not going to help you because the heating costs and all the rest of it are going to be quite considerable. So there's lots of different factors to be involved, even when it comes to kind of communicating with builders and suppliers and things like that. And obviously they quote you for the manual aspect of how much it's going to cost for them to erect it, and then you're at their beck and call of when they can do it. And at the time, like I said, a lot of people were taking up these kind of opportunities to do DIY at home, and the wait list alone was a year, and that was a bit kind of ridiculous for when we needed it for. So for our specification, what we asked for was a 5 metre by 3 metre external garden office. It was the maximum space that we could kind of accommodate within rules and regulations in our back garden. When we found out obviously what we're being quoted for, it was around about the £20,000 mark. Some of them came in a little bit cheaper than that, but not far off of, and again you had to consider electrical installation and getting it all signed off and all the rest of it, which was all an additional cost. During this PowerPoint, I'll have to go through how we managed to do ours for just over £10,000. So half the amount that we're being quoted at certain places, which again are obviously doing them on a weekly and daily basis, but how you can kind of do it yourself and kind of make the most out of your money, as it were. So we went for the self-building option in this case, and when we did our research we found one company in particular that was doing the full project themselves with installation and giving quotes out, and they were also doing kit options which they'd only just started. So we were one of the few people in the country that have just been offered this kit option. So we took that and we thought, well, you know what, this is something that potentially we could do. We broke it down with them and kind of found out what options we had, and again it was something that we thought was a good idea. They do suggest that you are coming from a DIY background, or you have somebody that has an understanding of DIY kind of principles to build the kit. In this situation, it was sold to you like anybody could do it, which I believe anybody could, but you would need help from somebody that knows and understands what they're doing, because you're going to find a few problems as you go along the way. So I managed to rope in my in-laws, who were fantastic through the whole thing. They really kind of pulled together as a family and helped us with a lot of the building of the shell itself and the electrical installation and things like that. So I did get some help from my in-laws who coming from an electrical background. What else do we have to say about this? So the options are that you can build your own from scratch entirely if you were super good with DIY. So building it from obviously the floor up, the base upwards. This might save you even more money if you were to go out there and buy and obviously recruit the stuff as a source. But in kit form it meant that it was something that was hopefully going to be less stressful, and also came to a good kind of finish, as it were, knowing that you had bought something that they're selling for double the price, for instance, elsewhere. So that's quite helpful to know. So the one that we went for was a garden office self-build kit, which was done through futuresips.co.uk. They were a lovely company. They had a nice showroom, which not many places do. You are on the end of a hook with a lot of people who are dealing through eBay and websites and stuff like that, not assuming what's going on in the build process and what you're getting for your money. We went and viewed obviously their built projects, and we're really surprised. The builds were solid. They are probably one of the few suppliers that are dealing with SIP panels, which are essentially like heavily insulated, kind of almost like a jigsaw set, which are used in new builds, especially eco kind of buildings, because of their high insulation rating and high kind of energy rating, which was perfect for what we wanted it for. We didn't have to invest in loads and loads of money in heating this building, which luckily we don't have to do right now. The other benefits of this was that the availability was relatively good, although for them to come out and do this project, if I was to be asking them to do the whole thing, it was a year. But just them manufacturing it took them 4 months, which was pretty impressive given that they built everything from pretty much scratch. What else was beneficial from this company is that you didn't have to put the full instalment out front. I know it's a lot of money when it comes down to it, but if you think about it in instalments, we weren't going out anywhere. We would go out regularly to, say, London or cinema or takeaways and restaurants, all the rest of it. So all that money we were putting aside was soon tallying up. And when we decided to go for this, it was a 35% option to put down first, which was about 3,500, and then there was an additional 6,000 to put on, which was 2 weeks before the delivery of the actual building itself. So it gave us plenty of time to kind of save up, and it was hard work, but we managed to do it, and hopefully it's going to help us in the future. So the preparation we started pretty much as soon as we decided that we wanted to go for it, and we'd sealed the deal with obviously paying the deposit and things for it. Building the base, what I tend to advise a lot of people is that you have to be quite conscious of what's available to you in your back garden. Obviously we don't have a massive back garden, it's relatively small in the grand scheme of things, but we don't use it at all. It's pretty much a wasted space. We have quite a big shed in the back garden. It was 2.5 metres by 3 by 5 meters, I believe. No, it was 3 meters wide depth by 2.5. So it essentially was half the amount of space that we were going for in the garden office by the 5x3. And this was luckily already on a concrete base, which we thought, well, if we extend that base, it's going to then save quite a bit of money when it comes to building the rest of the project. And it's already a wasted space because the shed was kind of just full with rubbish at this point. There are different aspects of what you need to be aware of as well when creating the concrete base. We had to dig down quite low into the ground to find out what was seeping underneath, so be conscious of different things like soakaways and pipe work and networks and stuff like that. So luckily we had none of that. The underneath of the actual ground itself was kind of more mud and clay, so it was a lot of hard work in trying to clear all of that. It took me probably about a day and a half, 2 days to clear away all of the mud, and digging down about 6 inches deep. And then what we tended to do is fill the whole layer once we've marked it out for an additional 2.5 by 5. An additional 2.5 by 3. We then added in things like MOT, which is kind of low coarse rocks, which would then be compacted with a whacker, which will give you a smoother surface to then sand and cement on top of. And this was a baptism of fire, because this is all stuff that I've never done in my life, but I was kind of driven by my father-in-law, who gave me all the advice of what we need to be doing and ideas on what to watch on YouTube, and self-teach yourself as you go along. And again, it was kind of a good project for us all to kind of chip in with. So starting the build, the self-build kit came with instructions, but essentially the instructions were quite simple, which was a bit frustrating when it came down to it, because you pay all this money and you assume that it's going to be a step-by-step kind of nice booklet where it goes, right, use this place there, this would be beneficial for this. It didn't come like that. It came with each panel numbered, and then on each number, on one corresponding picture, it told you where to put each bit, which you thought, okay, right, that's fine if it's as simple as that. But what we found is that most of the panels would be in and out a few millimeters, which would then be quite frustrating, because you would assume that the whole building would be flush. So after chasing up via email chains and stuff just for more information, they said, oh yeah, there will be obviously a kind of a differential between each panel and stuff, which we weren't aware of. It didn't cause too much dramas in the end, but it was never going to be perfect when it came to the kind of square element of it. We started with the floor upwards, so luckily for us, each panel is pretty much the same in depth and diameter. They're very solid. They're about 100 millimeters of installation between each of the chipboards either side, or high tensile wood, kind of high tensile wood, I believe it is, not chipboard. But it's very solid, so once it was down, it was never going anywhere, which is again quite helpful. Some people don't do concrete bases either. I was told that within this company, to save time, they tend to use what is essentially floor spikes, which have like a kind of a 4x2 piece of wood in between, and it creates like essentially a floorboard beneath it to sit on. So this is quite helpful if you have like an uneven surface. But again, the spikes come in quite expensive, so it didn't really add up to put in floor spikes when you had half of it concrete already. So we decided to do the whole concrete. But I think personally, having a concrete base with the amount of weight that this garden office is probably a much more stable option for you if you was to have any issues with subsidence or whatever in the future. So that's one thing to consider. It did take 2 of us at a time to lift these panels, and these panels kind of will take about maybe 4 or 5 individual panels to make a wall, and that's the same sort of idea for the floor and for the roof itself as well. So putting together the shell, as I've just demonstrated there, essentially is each panel individually slotting between, with almost like a tongue and groove situation with the wood battening between the two. That's held together with expanding foam and lots and lots of long screws. They're very solid once you put them up. Like I said before, it wasn't going anywhere once it was down, but it was quite a lot of hard graft for obviously all of us chipping in at a time, and a few weekends were spent kind of stressed out and working hard in the sun. Once you had the shell up, essentially you were looking at trying to put the roof on and get it waterproof, just so everything didn't get soaked, because as you can be aware, the British weather is always terrible, so you can never assume it's going to be good through the summer months. The roof was obviously flat, so it didn't exceed over your 2.5 metre rule, and it all came in one piece of EDM high density rubber essentially, and that was held together with PVA and battening around the side with fascia boards and stuff like that once they put on at the end. What you can also see there is that we started battening the outside, and that's a breathable membrane that's been wrapped around the body of the self-build kit, which it luckily all came with all this as well. So that's one benefit of going through a kit form, as I say, building it, sourcing it all yourself. It can be a nightmare to get things to fit where they should. So working their way on the outside, once that breather membrane was up and the battening was done, we were looking at trying to clad the whole building. The cladding is a very essential part of how it looks, so again there are options of what they put out there. The cheapest option is usually the redwood option, which is similar to what you'd see with decking. However, the redwood is usually untreated, so unless you do something like paint it or put sealer on it or wash it or whatever, it's going to weather quite quickly and it's going to look a bit naff like most sheds do. So we went for the mid-range, which is the Thermo wood, which is a redwood, but it's treated with heat and making it and also water resistant. So it's going to last quite some time and not hopefully fade as time goes on. The most expensive option out there was the cedar wood, and the cedar wood naturally is weather resilient, which is lovely, and it will weather, but it will go into almost like a silver colour away from kind of a more vibrant kind of brown. So that was a good option as well. However, the price of a cedar wood cladding was probably about £2,000, maybe £3,000 more than what we had actually sold out for. So as much as we'd love to have done it, we just couldn't afford it at that time, so we went for the better kind of mediocre version of it. And some places will charge you an absolute bomb for different kind of finishes and stuff like that, and that's where you've got to be very careful when dealing with other companies after these, okay? The cladding system, again, as I said before, breather membrane around the whole aspect, so these are two different layers, which will help with weathering and insulation, a bit of air in between the two as well, which would flow through freely. You then have the battening, which is again this blue wood, which has been chemically treated to be kind of resilient to different weather types and stuff like that. And this went around the whole building in a grid system, where you would then kind of hold the whole thing together with lots and lots of pins which were provided for a nail gun, which wasn't provided, so we had to go out and source a nail gun and learn how to use it, which was great fun, but it took quite some time, as there was nearly 2,000 pins to put through the whole process of the building itself. You then looked at the double glazing, so I've compressed these pictures a little bit more just so you can see what we're doing there. But we had a very large window. It took up most of the front aspect of the building, which is lovely for bringing in light and things like that, but obviously a bit daunting when you think about putting in all the glass and making sure it stays upright, because it weighed a ton when we put it in as well. And then you had a full-size window at the side, which again is an option to where you can put these if you wanted them, so it doesn't have to be in a rigid structure. They advise you, where do you want this, and we can make it into that panel. which is really helpful, but for me I wanted both of them bringing in a light source which I could sit next to and see a lot more things looking out the window as not. They also suggest that in this case you might want to get somebody who's a bit familiar with double glazing to install these, which was something they didn't tell us before we bought the actual kit. But we looked into it and we managed to do it relatively fine. It was actually quite straightforward. I mean, luckily my father-in-law and mother-in-law did some revision online and found out how to put these in, and it was relatively straightforward. You basically create a frame around the actual already built kind of recess for the windows and doors, and then you'd screw it in, silicone seal it, make sure it's all watertight, and that's pretty much it, which again was great in the end. It worked a lot better than we thought. That was one of the most daunting bits. Within the internal aspect, once again it was nice and watertight. We took our time, so at this point there was more lockdowns which prevented us from doing so much, so it was very stop-start. We basically mimicked a grid system on the internal with battening, because we decided to, instead of have, say, that chipboard that would finish on the back of that board, we thought we'd go for plasterboard because it looks so much better. It will hide stuff like your cabling, and your sockets can be recessed and your lights can be recessed, and that again looks lovely, as opposed to having all these visible wires and cables and sockets. It looks a bit naff. So we thought, well, we'd go against that, we'd do this. The plasterboard obtained from a local business, builder's merchant essentially, who were very good. They delivered it all on time, and I think the plasterboard alone for the whole building was about an additional 200 quid, so it wasn't a huge kind of output for this. If you were to say get an individual to come out and do it, it would obviously cost a lot more, but the plasterboards, other than putting them all in places, which was obviously a little bit more complicated because it was a bit heavy, went up relatively well and tended to work well in the end, so we're quite happy with that. It also gives you a lot smoother surface to paint on, so when we actually kind of sealed it all and kind of did all the plaster in these areas to kind of cover what we had, it was a much nicer finish when it came to painting. The wiring throughout this, so like I said at the beginning guys, you really need somebody who is an electrician to do these sorts of wiring projects. It's not something you should tamper with yourselves. Luckily we have family members who were electricians, so they advised heavily on what we should and shouldn't do. Basically they gave me a list of things that I would want in there and to try and source it locally. So we went away and we bought things such as like your 6 double sockets, your 6 flashlights. We had 2 external motion sensor lights, we had 1 external double socket, and we have a stainless steel fuse box, which again is your discretion, but personally I think this was the best spec for what I wanted, and it was a lot more than a lot of companies that did the whole project would offer you. They'd offer you usually less lights, less sockets, less kind of options for you to kind of go with, so bear that in mind. And it is an additional cost if you don't have somebody like a friend or family member who can do it for you. So the internal finishing, so what we went for once the plasterboard was all up, we sealed it all, we made sure that all the marks and all of the holes and kind of joins in the plasterboard was all, well, essentially filled. We then painted the whole room brilliant white, which again is something that we might change later on in life, but we thought, well, it brings in the most light, so again it's a good option. The flooring, we went for a white oak effect laminate. So joys of starting this project was that because it brings in so much light and because it was a reflector to the walls, it is essentially something that would have helped us kind of get the most out of what we wanted, and there wasn't anything where we had to move in the building. It was a blank canvas, so it meant that flooring was so much easier and quicker to when I've done it in the house. We left an expansion gap around the whole kind of building for the floor as well, so that if it does kind of swell or change, which is normal of wooden flooring and stuff, that it wouldn't cause any kind of bumps or added stresses on the joints of the wood itself. And there we have it. This is our finished project. So this is the white laminate oak flooring, which again I just got from a local builder's merchants, painted throughout, the sockets are up, the lights are all on. We've got additional security lights on the outside as well for our driveway, but generally it worked quite well, and it's plenty of space for us to kind of take up hobbies. We've been doing gym classes in there and lots of bits and pieces at the moment, and hopefully keeping it open for all that space and not filled with junk. So the costings of the whole gardening office was something that I was quite strenuous throughout the whole project, because I didn't want it to exceed lots of kind of money, although it was a good investment. It's just that we couldn't really afford it all at the moment in time. So the DIY garden office studio, which we bought through the website and mentioned, it came with all of these listed parts, so it is quite a lot for what you get, and it will get it all the way up to a point where you then have to worry about internal kind of fixings and kind of what you want it to look like. But bear in mind that the cladding choice might vary on your price. So the Thermo wood is a mid-range. If you were to go for a redwood, treat it yourself, it would also bring your prices down by probably about another £1,000, maybe £2,000. And if you were to go the opposite way and get cedar, it's maybe another £2-3,000 on top. So there are ways to make it cheaper if you were to go down that route. That was the kit alone. It was just over £9,000 with the delivery charge as well. The costings for the base. So again, the base is completely dependent on what you have. If you already have a concrete level kind of ground to go on, then great, you don't have to worry about this. But if you wanted to do the opposite and get them to do the base, or supply you with like the steel kind of ground rods or ground poles or whatever they offer you, it's usually about 10-15 of them, and they're about £25 a pop, maybe even more in some cases. So it's down to what you want to do. I think the concrete base was pretty idiot proof when you actually did it, so it's going to give you the most stable ground to go on. Some of these things you might already have as well, so we did build for bits that we didn't have, like wheelbarrows and wood and all the rest of it, so that's all additional. That's all for kind of tampering it and making sure that it was all flush. And we had to invest in lots of bags to clear away things like your dirt and your rocks and stuff like that, so that's all stuff that again you may or may not need. But we did the concrete base for just over £350, so that didn't work, that didn't do too badly, to be fair. So the rest of the costings here were essentially for things that we didn't have. So for the tool hire, we used the whacker for the one day, we used a cement mixer for one day, we used a nail gun for the weekend, and again we used a local tool hire provider to do that. It wasn't so expensive, and again that kept prices down. The internal finishes was completely dependent on what you would like, so it could be a lot cheaper than what, for instance, we did. But for the plasterboard finish, the paints, the ceiling, the lights, outside lights, cables, all the kind of the wiring all the way to the internal kind of fuse box and stuff like that, it came to just under £700, so it wasn't too bad at all considering the amount of spec that we went to. The total came in at just over £10,000, so again very happy in where that was for a space which is essentially almost as big as one of our bedrooms. What we thought in this situation is that for that money it was less than what our stamp duty was when we bought our first home, which was this one, which is amazing when you consider that the stamp duty has done nothing for us over the years. It just went in the government's hands, and the cars that we drive have paid more than what we paid for this, and hopefully it will last a lot longer than them as well, so that will be one positive to take away from this. So a lot of hard work, we feel it's a solid investment, and we're very pleased with how it kind of all worked out, and hopefully it inspires a lot of you to do the same. I will give to the family that helped me, so my wife Josie, my in-laws Mark and Jean, and my brother-in-laws Chris and Matt. And without them I wouldn't have been able to do this project, so hopefully you enjoyed that, and good luck in your own projects. Bye bye now.